go-karting started in 1987, would have been the first time I sat in a go-kart, and that all came about by a guy who was actually a friend of Kerry's father's. Wanted him to go and have a go in their go-karts, and they took me along as well. And we had a go and fell in love with go-karting. Then we decided to start racing our own. I raced karts for 15 years in the end, and I had a couple of little breaks in there, like when the funds didn't stretch far enough to keep us going. But in the end, the last probably, 5 or 6 years of that karting I didn't run club level. I only ran at a higher level. So we did all mini series, we did state titles, we did national titles, and that was where we focused we put our focus. That put us amongst the better drivers at the time. And I was never a lightweight karter, so I always had a few kilos of a weight disadvantage, and especially in the early days and what I had to do to compete was I had to be able to keep up with the lighter guys. I had to develop a style that probably made me fast in the mid corner of a corner, middle of a corner, and I think I mastered that pretty well in the end, and that I wasn't the greatest breaker, but I was very good mid corner and coming out of the corners, so I could always get a run on guys to maximise my speed at into the next corner sort of thing. And it probably happened. I was a determined person, and I was never a person to want to come last, and that determination drove me on to think of a better way to do it. And that was one thing that I distinctly remember, that there's no point being fast into a corner and slow out of the corner, because you're always going to get blown away. And I developed that style that stuck with me. It's stuck with me forever, and it's probably still how I drive today. At the end of go-karts, there was a time there where I didn't actually race anything for a few years. It was because we were also mad water skiers as well, so we went water skiing, did something totally different for a while, and then but I was always involved in motor racing, not racing, but I was involved. And my good mate Dave Barham I got involved with him pretty heavily in helping him with his little sports car, and I became basically his spanner man for him on his sports car, and we travelled all around the country with him. And I think at the time, I can't remember now, I think it's 3 or 4 Australian titles we won with him. But between him and I, we were able to engineer his car, and someone had come up with an idea, and they'd say, have a look at his car and say, oh, this car would be much better if it had a tube through here, and we'd bring that car home, we'd strip it down, and we'd weld a tube in, and we'd try it. And we actually built a scale balsa wood model of his car, and we used to sit up in his workshop at night time, and we'd have this balsa wood model, and we'd put bars and tubes in this thing, and we'd hang bits of wire with nuts and washers off it, and we'd measure the flex in the chassis and what it had changed by putting a tube in here or taking a tube out there, and the changes in the car. And I remember spending many hours up there with this balsa wood doing exactly that. We'd stick a bit of balsa wood in and we'd try it. And we were able to replicate what we did with that in his car. And or just previously to when I started with him, he cut his car in half and he added 9 inches into the wheelbase to make it handle better. And and after that we worked on that, and we changed it. And that's where I learnt. I was able to talk to him about driving skills, and because in go-kart, the driving skill, because he never came through go-karts or anything, he just hopped into a race car and went and drove it. But I was able to talk to him about driving and different styles of driving and making the car work. And then he was clever enough to be able to go and try it and engineer it. He was an engineering mind, and he could work it out in between us. And that's where we went from there. And then hence we went into an MX-5 later on. It was all from him and I talking. and what people were doing with MX-5s, and we didn't particularly agree with it. So we said, let's build one. So we did. And that's where I went from go-karts. That's how I got into circuit racing. That's how we got into MX-5s, was they started the Q1 Hour series come along. And we, Dave was co-driving with, there was a race series, he had to have 2 drivers. And so Dave partnered with Brian Furby, and I went along as pit crew, and I helped them out, because Dave basically, back in that era, Dave and I went everywhere together. We were known in racing, it was always Dave and Russell show. And that was what they used to call us, the Dave, and here they are again, the Dave and Russell show. And we, that was how we got into MX-5s, and we wanted to change the car and make it better, and because it wasn't our car, we couldn't do it. That was how we came to build my MX-5. And what I got, through a friend of a friend, I got in contact with a guy in Sydney who had an MX-5 that had a half a roll cage in it. And he used to do sprints and stuff, and he wanted to sell it, but it wasn't going. And he converted it to 1800, so I said, I'm going to buy that thing, and we're going to build a race car, and we're going to build a fast one. I remember saying to Dave one night, I said, I'm going to build the fastest 2F MX-5 that's around, because I reckon we can. Anyway, so we did. We went and bought this car that was half done, and we brought it home. Wouldn't start, couldn't get it to run, and we fiddled with it, and eventually we got it going. It was all good. And then for the first 12 months, but the big thing that we wanted to change in the MX-5 to what they were running was the way they set the suspension up, because the suspension had no travel. It was always sitting on the bump rubbers, and it never had any travel. So, then we said, well, if we're going to build a car, the first thing we need is suspension travel. To lower the MX-5 down to a level where you need it, the shockies bottom out, and that was what was happening. So we said, how are we going to do this? So we came up with a way, without breaking the rules, to give us shocky travel and not have the shockies bottom out without having to go and spend thousands and thousands of dollars on shock absorbers. Anyway, we did, and we found a part in America that allowed us to do it, and then all we had to do was machine it down to give us the travel, and we did that. And instead of the shocky running on the bottom 30 mils of the shock travel, we built my car so that the shocky actually runs in the middle of the shocky travel. And looking at the car, nobody would know how we did it. They can't tell, it just looks standard. But what you can't see is what the difference is. And Dave and I, we got to, and we built this car, and the first 12 months I ran it with a stock standard engine. Stock standard clutch, and every time I drove it, I think that first year I drove it something like 22 times. I can't remember the exact figure, but it was something like that. And every time I drove it, it was never the same. We'd always change something. And by the end of that year, I think I did a 1 minute 26.7 round QR with a stock standard engine. And there was all the guys with the fast engines, and they weren't any faster. I couldn't compete with them, but through turns 1 and 2 at Queensland Raceway, I could close 20 car lengths on them, and it was all through handling. And I'd close on them at every corner. I'd close, and they'd and then consequently, once again, second year in, we built a new engine and basically cleared out from the pack. And it was all from the work that we did, the basic work that we did in the first year. In 2012, I won the 2F championship, and I had a fast 2F car, and I ran out of ideas on how to make that car faster. Like, I had plenty of ideas, but weren't practical ideas. And then in 2012, I won the championship, and then it sort of become at the end of a culmination of many years. Well, it was many years of of racing, and I thought, I'm just doing the same thing over and over. And I thought, well, we need to. I was looking for a new challenge, and I didn't know what the challenge was going to be. And I actually contemplated just giving up motor racing altogether at the time, because I'd achieved, I felt, all I could in my car. And, I didn't want to go and race a sedan. I thought about going to trucks, those Oz trucks. I looked at those, but they didn't really appeal to me. And then the opportunity came up, and I started toying with, 2Bs. I wanted to race on slicks, and I did have the opportunity from driving other people's cars a bit, and on slicks, and it was good. And then we started looking at 2B. I like the sports car thing, so my option was to stay in sports cars. That's where my heart was. And I was going to go into a Ginetta. We decided to buy a Ginetta and go and give it a go. And then we got talking about, horsepower and things, and we got talking to other guys about all sorts of stuff. And then I got talking to the Porsche guys, and that was all through a good mate of mine, young Daniel Ensel. He was the one that said, if you want to get into that, seriously consider going into a Porsche. Anyway, we did. And once again, with lots of consultation with Kerry's father, John, we decided to go down the Porsche line. And once again, he backed my ability to drive one of these cars and helped us to get into a Porsche. But it was a Porsche that was eligible to run in 2B, and which was, to me, was the true sports car category. And that's how we sort of progressed into there. And it was a fair move. All of a sudden you're in a car with a lot of horsepower, and things happen very quickly, and it takes a lot to get your head around that stuff. Porsche was always my dream car, because I've always amazed how they can build a car in a factory that just comes out off a production line and is this well-tuned, well-oiled machine that just is a rocket ship. And they have so many years of development, 50 plus years of development in these cars, but they've never moved from their original concept. And they just do everything well. And that was what I probably liked about it, the Porsche over the Ginetta. The Ginetta, a really good car. But the Porsche, they're a proper production car. But their engineering is just second to none. Like they brake well, they turn well, they've got good horsepower, but reliable horsepower. They're not, their engine, the mechanicals, they're just, they're strong, they're built to do their job. They're not a car that's cobbled together with a bit out of this car and a bit out of that car and then turned into a race car. They are a purpose-built machine to go racing with, and that was probably what attracted me to them mostly, was the fact that, you can go and buy brake discs off the shelf from them, you can buy brake pads off the shelf. You don't have to, and it's for a Porsche. It's not for something to go onto some other form of car, and that's what I liked about it. And to own one, it does give you a fair kick. There is a prestige thing, I suppose, with a Porsche, but to me, it's just a race car. Like, I don't think I'll ever have the emotional attachment to this as what I have with my MX-5, in the fact that I didn't build this car. I'm just steering it. Yep, I'll have to engineer it to a degree, but with the MX-5, I engineered that car. I built that car and I engineer it, but I've worked out how to make that car go fast. Whereas the Porsche will always be, it's going to be a fast car that was built to be fast, and all I do is tune the thing. I don't change the engineering of it to make that car, that much different. It's it's going to be, it is what it is.
It's not fast without a good driver though.
That's right. Maybe we do steer it pretty well, but it's but all that comes back to many years of developing a racecraft, I guess. It's but that's right. It does take a good steerer to drive one around, and they're not a forgiving car by any means. They bite hard. If you want to drive around at 7/10s, that's fine. But if you want to drive a car at 10/10s, they will bite, and they bite hard. And I'm finding that out. Found it out a couple of times now. At this point in time, my plan is I'm not sure how many more years I'm going to race for. Next year is 30 years of motor racing since I started in go-karts. I don't know. I'm not sure. I want to retire one day. I can't, because I'm a self-funded racer. I don't have a business to write my racing off with or anything. So it comes off our bottom line, and it costs a lot of money to race a motor car. And we don't know what the future holds, and whether next year will be my last year, I don't know. Or whether I step back and we just do some sprints and stuff, I don't know. We'll just see how the ball rolls. And I have thought the last couple of years, and hoping and getting an opportunity to have this car, is that I don't think I'll race too many more years. I think there comes a time in your life where you've got to start thinking about the future. But one thing that I have always maintained, that I never wanted to grow old and think that, geez, I wish I had done that. And I've been lucky that I've had Kerry's family to back me in what I love to do, and they love it too. Well, otherwise they wouldn't have backed me into it. And I think that it's that's probably what's driven me on to do it. And my goal this year is to get John into my Mazda and do some sprints. And where that goes, I don't know, and how he goes. So whether I go and do some sprints along with him, but I am going to race next year. At how much, I don't know at this point. It's getting hard to get time off work to go motor racing. They always seem to fall when you're working, but we'll see. And I'd love to do the championship, because racing's in my blood, and we all like to win championships. But because we're not racing for $1 million, and at the end of the day, you'll get a $20 trophy if you win the championship. And I love that as much as I do the next guy. But I also know, and I've always raced only when I can afford it. When I can't afford it, the car gets parked, and it's always been. There's been times where the car's sat on blocks in the shed for 12 months, and I've had a year off to recoup, and that's the way I race. But when I do race, I'm not there to make up the numbers. I'm there to do as good as I can. And it was good when I got this car to go out and race the Wayne Hennings and these guys that I've watched on TV for many, many years. And to know that you can race amongst those guys and actually and beat them in a certain track, especially Lakeside, which is, you know, Lakeside is a driver's track. In my view, is Lakeside is probably the best track in Australia. It's people will probably argue with that, but probably the only ones that have never raced there, I would say. And to go around a place like that, I think you have to be a reasonable peddler. And it's and I think, you know, you earn a lot of respect from people when you do go around there and you put on a show. But you know, it's not. I race with him. I mean, I'm not a person who goes out and is prepared to tear my car up along the wall just to try and do a fast time. Like I do know my limits, and we all make mistakes. But it's yeah. But where we go from here, I'd like to say that I'd like to race for the next 10 years, but I can't do that. I think for me it'd be silly to say that, and like I don't want to work till I'm 70 because I've supported my racing habit. So I've worked to race at the moment, and so whether next year's my last year that I race, I don't know. We'll see.